So one of the things I forgot to mention that pastors do is we prepare for sermons and for preaching. And when I prepare to preach, I do a lot of reading, usually early in the week. And this week, I noticed a trend among many of the commentaries that I was reading. And it was this joke. And every single commentary, every single author said, here's a joke, we don't know who told it, it's really bad, but it has meaning for this passage from Mark. So I'm going to tell you the joke. We don't know who wrote it, and it's supposedly really bad. You can laugh if you want, though. I encourage that. Please do. So the joke is about a sea captain who was at the top of his profession. He had earned a reputation as one who could make excellent decisions in those times of crisis. People did notice, though, that just before it was time to give his orders to the crew, he would go down into his stateroom, open his safe, and pull out a slip of paper and read it. Then he would stride out on the deck and make the correct call. Naturally, everyone wondered what is on that slip of paper. And it was no surprise that when he died, one of the first things the crew did after his funeral service was gather in his stateroom and watch while the first mate opened the safe and pulled out the well-worn slip of paper. He read it aloud: port left, starboard right. In those difficult times, the captain knew to remind himself repeatedly of the basics. The captain's little slip of paper held information that any sailor worth their salt should know, right? You should know your left and your right. The connection, though, to our gospel may be a bit opaque, but there is one. There is one. So let's review first the story. This is kind of like a day in the life of Jesus. We remember from last week's story that Jesus went to the Sabbath service in the synagogue, and he spent his day teaching, and then there was an interruption, and he rid an individual of an unclean spirit, proceeded to heal Simon's mother-in-law, continued to heal people throughout the evening, cast out more demons, and hopefully maybe slept a bit. And everyone wanted more, right? More curing, more casting out, more miracles. In fact, Jesus gets up really early to go to a quiet, deserted place. And Simon goes looking for Jesus. In fact, it says Simon hunted for him. And when he finds Jesus, he says, "Everybody's looking for you." And of course they are. Here's the person who can cure the ills. After all, he did it for your neighbor. And people must have felt, now it's my turn. The problem with miracles, writes Barbara Brown Taylor, it's hard to witness them without wanting one of your own. Every one of us knows someone who is suffering. Every one of us knows someone who could use a miracle. But miracles are hard to come by. And so we theorize, right? We theologize, maybe. We spiritualize why we haven't yet received our miracle. Last night, after the service, I went over to the bowling alley where there was a big steak feed, the 18th annual Fish Family Fight Against Cancer. And it's a personal reason that I went. When I went last year, my father was ending his battle with cancer, right? He had just decided to go into hospice, and we knew that all of those treatments, the radiation, the chemotherapy, had not succeeded in ridding him of cancer. And my mother told me so many people had what they felt, honestly, were helpful things to say. They would say, well, maybe God is preparing you for something great. Maybe there's a reason for this long illness. Maybe, someone else said, Satan was testing them and they should stay strong, which was a little bit laughable because neither of my parents are really churchgoers, so that they were told they needed to have more faith. Maybe there was something they had done. Well-meaning voices would say, maybe you should go to so-and-so and have them pray for you. They have a good track record. Some said, God's timing is different from ours. One asked my mother if she had tried fasting, which is kind of laughable. She really likes to eat, so that would not be something she would try. I'm sure we've even heard in our times when we've been praying for a miracle on TV, send me, my church, my ministry money, and God will heal you for sure. Well, besides not being very helpful, these claims, these admonitions, encourage us to assume that health and wholeness and comfort are the norms we should expect to experience in this life. Well, they're hoped for sure. Everything else, though, by this accounting, physical pain, emotional pain, chronic illness, untimely death, is then an aberration. It's no wonder, I understand this, why people would flock to churches that promise prosperity, that promise healing and happiness Sunday after Sunday. Why not? Why not grab hold of the magic if it's out there to claim? Why not demand glitter and spectacle? Now, I love the healing stories in the Gospels. I love that these stories show us the power and the compassion which Jesus touches the sick and the suffering, restoring them to their families, their communities, their vocations. I don't try to explain away these healings, but consider this. The Gospels really only record about 36, maybe. I don't know, I never really counted, but Jesus' miracles might have numbered more, but there are only a few that we read about. In this week's story, consider this. The whole city came to Jesus, but he healed many, not all. Though the crowds continued to look for him in the morning after he had healed Simon's mother-in-law, he left them unhealed and moved off to another town. In short, Jesus really only healed a small number of people in one tiny part of the world before he died. Jesus came to proclaim the kingdom, not to eliminate the world's despair and disease. And unlike us, he never glamorized these healings. If anything, he seems embarrassed, maybe humble, shy, about the attention his healings attract, as if they're beside the point he comes to make. Most of the time, he encourages people to keep their healings and exorcisms quiet. What does this mean? Well, maybe it means we're the ones who've turned Jesus into a magician. Maybe it means that we're to look more carefully. If we do look more carefully, we'll find a Messiah, but maybe not the one we expect. The Jesus that we encounter in the gospel is much more mysterious than maybe the glittery, glamorous healers of his day. He's quiet, he's subtle, maybe more so than our quick fix culture wants to follow. Consider the Jesus of verse 35 of this week's story, who eludes the crowds, seeks out deserted places, prays in the dark, and eludes his disciples so they have to hunt for him. This isn't a Jesus, I don't think, who will appeal to faith healers and prosperity preachers. But he is the Jesus of the Gospels. Perhaps he is the Jesus with that little slip of paper in his robe on which is printed port left, starboard right. Or maybe these words, preach the good news. The point of the healing, says Sarah Heinrich, isn't necessarily the healing. Crazy. Maybe if we approach this from a different angle. In Jesus' day, and really to some extent in our day still, illness bears a heavy social cost. In Jesus' day, not only would a person be unable to earn a living or contribute to the well-being of the household, illness would affect their ability to take a role in the community, to be honored as a valuable member of a town or a village. Peter's mother-in-law is an excellent case. It was her calling, it was her honor to show hospitality to guests in her home. Cut off from that role by illness, she was cut off from doing that which integrated her into the world. Who was she when she no longer was able to provide for these guests in her house? And what Jesus did was restore her to her social place. Not in a way that keeps her down, but in a way that restores her to feeling a part of life. It's important, I think, to see that healing, when Jesus does this, is about restoration to community, restoration of a calling, of a role, as well as restoration to life. For life without community and life without calling is very bleak. Jesus' ministry involves restoration, inclusion of those cut off from community. This discussion then leads naturally to the end of the passage, where suddenly Jesus seems to about face away from his calling as a healer. He insists he must proclaim throughout the villages and towns the message he came to deliver. That proclamation or announcement continues in both word and deed as Jesus goes forward. That little slip of paper reminded Jesus of the bigger picture. Good news will restore to whole not just one or a few, but all. We've seen in the story of the man possessed last week and Peter's mother-in-law this week how good the good news was. Part of God's reign is the casting out of demons and turning aside of illness for the sake of restoration of those oppressed to a full role in their communities. How vital it is to know that the coming of God's kingdom is indeed good news for those who claim fear and terror as their reason to lead. Jesus speaks God's opposition and shows over and over again that God's power serves the people. From the very beginning of his ministry, Jesus casts out those spirits opposed to God's people, those things which laid them low, as a part of his heralding of kingdom. We must always remember, God comes to restore, and God's power is sufficient to do it. Amen. Our hymn of the day today is number 840.